and I really don't.
So what do you want for a result of your film? How do you, and your work, because you're continuing to work on this. You were with us on the 9/11 Truth teleconference last night. What do you, let's go to another direction. What do we want to come out of this work and of exposing some of the deceptions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the first thing that I wanted to do when I did it is I wanted to, as I said earlier, I think there's two schools of thought. There's the educated, or uneducated is probably not the right word, but the aware people and the scholarly people that really want to dig deeper. And then there's kind of the mass that are so busy putting food on the table, they don't have the time to really investigate and all that. So I wanted to do a film that was good enough that the people that already knew would still find it compelling. So I tried to sprinkle in enough new stuff and make the video compelling enough that even though they're already part of the choir, that they weren't totally bored watching stuff they probably already knew.
Right, right.
And then I also wanted to appeal to a group that isn't there, that isn't aware. Right. And I really think this is incredibly important that you can't ever make a good decision if you're not aware to begin with. And I really look at awareness like a seed, planting a seed, that eventually it'll gnaw away, it'll do something, and it'll affect the choices you make and the consequence of those choices. So I looked at the mission of this film as awareness. It's just to make people aware that, yes, it starts with 9/11, and then it's further promulgated by Bush. And all the things that happened with the invasions of Iraq and the Patriot Act and all the destruction of our freedoms, and then we thought our savior was coming and everything was going to be turned around, and if anything, it's worse under Obama.
Yes.
And then I said, geez, there's really another force involved here. Yeah. That both Obama and both Bush are they're players. I mean, they're definitely the back row of the chessboard, but they're not the ones making the moves, and that's kind of how this was born. And then I said, well, how can they do it? And they can only continue this deception with the participation of media, and with that participation. And if you ever watch TV, I mean, you'll see that across every major network, the message is basically the same. It's so bad that they've even synchronized commercials. Yeah. You can't flick between ABC and NBC during news time to see what the other one's saying because they've synchronized their commercials. Right. So if you're synchronizing commercials, it's pretty obvious. And the same message, I mean, the same basic message is what we hear. And the thing that's scary is no one ever asks questions. It's not necessarily what they cover, it's what they don't cover. Right. They don't cover the Fed. They don't cover how we manage. I mean, the Feds have been a secret for 100 years. They don't cover fractional banking. They realize that even in good times, the most the bank has in reserves is 10% of what they lend out. So if there was ever a run on the bank, they'd be put out of business like that, because even in good times, and now I think it's zero. I think the Fed has got no reserve requirements.
And a lot of banks are failing.
Yeah. And, so...
The states are having troubles.
Yeah, well, no, that's the next... I think they just did $26 billion to the states now. Yeah. So anyway, the more I looked, the worse it got. And I said, this deception can't happen without the full participation of a higher elite and media. Right. So I got into media control, and then I realized that there actually is an orchestration going on. That's the whole New World Order thing in the Rockefeller, and it's all based on money. And then
people being brainwashed to believe in this. I remember I was talking to somebody and I was telling him how I was disgruntled with Obama, and he said, well, he had no choice with the bailing out the banks. And I said, well, you could change the system. You can make a financial system based on sustainability, on well-being. You're not stuck in this situation that has been created for centuries now. 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, it was done right around Christmas time with Woodrow Wilson, and there was even a third-party usage.
Did you hear what he said after that?
Yes, and there's some people that might question that quote, but it seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Unbelievable. Said that we're being controlled now by a handful of influential people, that no longer does the public have a free choice and the free will to decide what's going to happen.
And you're giving an incentive for war, because they could make money no matter who wins or who loses. It used to be where if you're in the country and you're financing a war, if you lose everything. And that would be a good incentive not to create war. But there's no incentive in those to know that right before World War II, Prescott Bush and other these globalists were planning a coup d'etat in the U.S., and they tried to bring on a top 5-star general, General Smedley Butler. And Smedley Butler, and he went along with it and said, okay, they were going to give him 50,000 troops, and they were planning on making a Nazi government in the United States before Germany went in that direction. Wow. And he exposed this to Congress. He actually went along with it long enough so he could expose it. And then when he exposed it, it just went back into the woodwork. And then you find that these same financial players were financing the Nazis and the U.S. So they've been given cover much longer than we're alive, and that's the part where it could seem scary. Except that when you know these things, you get more than scared. You get upset, why should this go on without even people knowing about this important history? Especially having a Jewish background myself and knowing what happened in the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And then you get divisions within the 9/11 Truth movement, where some people just want to focus on Israel being the manipulator, but they're not going back far enough. Where if somebody's creating a Holocaust of the Jews in Germany to create Israel, they're not really Jewish, they're not really spiritual, they're not religious. They're just manipulating the divisions between us and making use of religions and races to divide and conquer us, and using the Muslims as scapegoats from 9/11 was a planned thing because of where the oil's located, and that's a big part of this whole cabal.
Yeah. It's all. I mean, I really think it's all about money. But your point on the Nazi influence or those things is really kind of scary, because I feel like that, and I'm just a newbie, but I feel like. During the prison, I don't know the exact thing, but the prisoners were being marched into Auschwitz with music playing. They didn't know. Mm-hmm. And I feel like here I am. I know how bad it is, and the public is being marched off the cliff, marched into oblivion, marched into this totalitarian world where they're serfs, and you have this power elite running everything, which is kind of and they're just doing it because they don't know any better. And because there's nobody out there saying, there's nobody saying the sky really is falling, guys.
I want to mention one hero in our truth movement, Jesse Ventura. He's done incredible work in his program called Conspiracy Theory on True TV. And I have links to it from flybynews.com to a lot of YouTubes and the full-length features. But he did a show recently on BP Oil where my last interview was with Len Horowitz and Sherry Kane. And they were on his program showing that they created a money incentive for this problem, which you've touched upon in your film, but even worse, the whole idea of the Gulf Stream maybe being affected by all that oil and the Corexit, there's really concerns with this weather patterns now going on in Europe. So we're kind of like behind the 8 ball. They are creating these crises. It's like mad people. I always give it the interpretation of the Lord of the Rings, where the nuclear bomb, when they created that, it kind of drove them mad, but they had all this power. And it was just like the Tolkien story, where you can't make sense out of it because it's just a madness that, it's destroying everything. And yet, we need a Frodo to, get that ring back to the source to deal with it. And I think that's what we're trying to deal with. We're trying to deal with the basic element of being a human being, of being alive, and maybe being a spiritual being, and not necessarily confined to our fears or our hopes, but we're actually part of a everlasting element that has truth and element of love to it, because otherwise how could we be created?
I mean, I really agree. I really think the only hope humanity has at this juncture, because the power structure is so bad and it's so deep, is feeling and thinking. We have to start feeling. We have to realize that we're a small cog and we're part of everybody. I mean, we're part of one society, one race, one humanity. And we have to start thinking. We have to realize we can't trust necessarily what comes on the TV. We can't trust necessarily what we read unless we can confirm it 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 different places, and establish what's true for us, and then act accordingly. And not just come home, grab a beer, grab a clicker, and turn on Dancing with the Stars and think that you know what's happening.
Right.
So, you know, but and it's sad. And as I say, the more I look, the worse it got. And I really do think that when a lot of this happened, a lot of this kind of went into high gear when the Cold War ended. And you had all that money that was competing with the buildup of Russian nuclear arsenals, and we had to compete with that. And then when that collapsed, where does all that inertia go? Well, if you create a war on terror, and then Homeland Security, and then all this, so suddenly a ton of that money can be funneled domestically, and then you go to war. And one of the clips I have in the film, which is it's on the film, it's actually on my website, where there's these people interviewing this guy, and one of them is saying, he says, we want to become known as the main supplier of hand-to-hand weaponry, which in the cheapest one at that point was China, was making the best rifles. And he said, we want to become known. And this journalist was saying, well, why are you spending so much money? I mean, you're never going to, you know, because, and he says, it's not really, he said, we're a bank, number one, and it's not about pushing one side. It's about debt management. It's about managing debt. If you own the debt, you own everything.
Right.
And that's really fundamentally what's happened when you hear about elite and banking elite and all that. I mean, and during the Nazi period and even today, war means that they go to the banks for both sides. The banks win and the people lose. And continue war and this whole military machine that was talked about and all that is, all those things are, you know, are furthered by this shift to war on terrorism, preemptive strikes. Anytime somebody says something's wrong someplace, well, we can say there's a terror cell.
Yeah.
Or there's I mean, it's so ridiculous. The Taliban is an insurgency. They just want control of Afghanistan. They're not sending people over to blow themselves up with bombs. You know, it's just crazy.
Again, going on to some of the solution, maybe with awareness, and when people are aware of this critical mass of public awareness, then a very obvious first step would be forgive all debt. Because then we can begin over again and start over with thinking about sustainability and health, being the priorities. That could happen in an eye flash, you know, just in a turnaround. But it won't happen without enough people being aware of the dark elements, and that's why it drives us, I think, as well as, you know, just feeling comfortable with. We want to know the truth, but we also want to get somewhere, and that's why we're here at this wonderful station, you know, and doing this type of work and showing you a film tonight.
Well, I appreciate that, and I really do think that it's time that, I mean, this little video camera costs $125, and it's time that we all become, you know, responsible for our own actions.